You've seen Viking victory feasts in films? Gold spilling, horns raised, songs echoing, but when the fires burned low, another story began. One whispered, erased, too shameful for chronicles to keep alive. This story isn't about warriors. It's about their prizes, queens, princesses, daughters of chieftains, women taken when halls fell silent. Not spared, not honored. Claimed, stripped, rewritten into property overnight. The sagas celebrate conquest, the feasts, the plunder. But missing is the truth of what happened after victory. The fate of noble women turned into weapons, currency, pawns of empire, because captivity was only the beginning. Their names would vanish, but their value would not. T1 AD, the Irish coast. The annals of Ulster recorded only one chilling line. Ettar was plundered by heathens. They carried off many women into captivity. Cold, ledger-like. Final Ettar, today called Howth, wasn't random prey. It guarded Dublin's northern gate, wealthy, strategic. And in the 9th century, its most precious resource wasn't silver or cattle, it was human lives, taken wholesale. Captured noble women were stripped of names, lineage, protections of rank, reclassified in Norse law as thrall, slaves. A single act reduced daughters of kings to property. Identity vanished. Value measured only in silver. Their journey began on long ships. Crowded decks. Bitter cold. The Atlantic was their first trial. Weakness meant death. Only the strongest endured the salt spray and hunger of the endless crossing. But survival at sea didn't guarantee mercy. On land, an even harsher fate awaited. Dublin became their destination, Vikings' largest slave market. Captives paraded, inspected, priced. A young noblewoman fetched 12 to 20 ounces of silver, the yield of an entire farmstead's labor for a year. Some stayed in Ireland, others shipped further to Denmark, Sweden, or east into Byzantine markets. Their skills, healing, weaving, knowledge, once honored, now commodities inflating their price tags. The chronicles never named them, just numbers, anonymous entries in cold ink. Women who once carried crowns erased in silence, not remembered, not even mourned. Only valued as ledger items, but in rare cases one woman's silence spoke louder than chains. Her name was Melkorka, daughter of an Irish king, captured mid-10th century, sold in Norway, bought by a powerful Icelander for a staggering price, 3 marks of silver. Melkorka refused to speak. For years she lived mute, concubine, captive. Her silence was resistance. It was her only armor, shielding an identity she refused to let her captor steal. One day, her captor overheard her whispering to her son in Gaelic, teaching him the language of kings. Her secret unveiled, her lineage revealed. The silent concubine was a princess, but even noble blood couldn't buy her freedom. She remained captive, her life reshaped by conquest. Her son, Olaf, grew into power. They called him the Peacock. Yet Melkorka never returned home. She died in Iceland, a royal buried far from her throne. Melkorka's story was rare. Most noblewomen never had their names recorded. Their survival strategies, silence, prayer, defiance, lost in the ashes of raids and the markets of conquest. For others, there was no survival, no bargaining, only fire. And some chose their end themselves rather than let Vikings claim their bodies as spoils of war. Because in Coldingham Abbey, noble women carved their own fate in blood. 17D. The great heathen army arrived. Inside Coldingham Abbey, Abbess Ebba the Younger knew what awaited her sisters, and she chose defiance, not surrender, as their final prayer. She sliced her nose and lip. One by one the nuns followed. They turned themselves into a spectacle of horror, denying the invaders' lust at the cost of their own faces. When Vikings smashed through, they found no trembling victims, only silent women, bloodied, mutilated, defiant. The prize denied. Rage replaced desire, and vengeance burned brighter than lust. Denied possession, the Vikings chose annihilation instead. They barred the doors, stacked timber, set fire to the abbey. Smoke consumed scripture. Flames swallowed defiance. Ebba and her sisters burned alive, choosing fire over violation. Their bones mingled with ashes, their names faded into soil. Yet their choice, the refusal to be owned, echoed louder than any saga sung of Viking conquest. In Viking lore, these women are footnotes. In history they are lessons. Conquest did not only plunder gold, it consumed bloodlines, erased queens, and devoured the powerless. What's worse, to be sold into silence or to burn in defiance. For noble women, defeat wasn't a single fate. It was a menu of horrors, none chosen freely, and this was only the beginning. For every name remembered, hundreds were erased. And the worst was yet to come, hidden behind silver, fire, and silence, because noble women were more than victims. They became the currency of conquest. By the early 11th century, Viking raids no longer looked like chaos. They looked like business. Conquests weren't random slaughters. They were pipelines, funneling noblewomen into markets across Europe. 11 AD Canterbury, England. After 20 days under siege, betrayal opened the gates. The cathedral fell. The leaders were captured, but noblewomen weren't slaughtered. They were preserved because their value outweighed their blood. Abbess Leofruna, Lady Elfgufu, women of standing. Their lives didn't end on that night. They were bartered, pawned like livestock. Their survival tied to negotiations written in silver, because these women weren't spared, they were priced. The ransom was staggering, 48,000 ounces of silver. Enough to buy peace, enough to buy back noble women. They weren't freed out of mercy. They were traded like treasure. The chronicles remember silver, not faces, not cries. Even the archbishop's brutal martyrdom eclipsed the fates of those women. Their survival written not in prayers, but in ledgers. In Scotland, Dumbarton Rock endured 4 months of siege, water gone, defenders broken. When surrender came, the king, his court, and noblewomen were taken, not slain. They became human cargo. What followed was one of the largest forced migrations of the Viking Age. A fleet of 200 ships carried plunder, and people back to Dublin. Captives filled the holds. Women who once commanded courts now crammed between oars, drowning in silence. Their names erased, their futures sold. The annals recorded it plainly. A great booty in people, not women, not queens. Just resources fueling Dublin's slave economy, Ireland, Scotland, England, even Iceland. Across the North Atlantic, noblewomen became the foundation stones of new Viking societies. Not by choice, but by chains. And genetic evidence proves this legacy still survives in bloodlines today. Modern DNA studies show over 60% of female settlers in Iceland carried Irish or Scottish ancestry. Behind every statistic was a story of capture, loss, and unwilling roots. These women built households, raised children, carved lives on hostile shores, yet their voices were absent from sagas, foundations of nations erased in silence. But not all fates ended in servitude. Some noblewomen were forced into roles far darker, sacrificed as grave companions, buried alive to serve queens in death as in life. One tomb in Norway revealed this horror with chilling certainty. In 1704, archaeologists uncovered the Oseberg ship. Inside lay 2 women, one aged, one younger. For decades they thought it was loyalty. Modern science whispers something far darker. The younger woman's DNA revealed foreign roots around the Black Sea. Her bones told of a sudden shift in diet from poverty to elite feast. She wasn't family, she was property. She may have been sacrificed, buried alive to accompany the queen. The lavish tomb wasn't hers, it was her owner's, her death, the final act of possession. Because in Viking ritual, even death couldn't free the captive. From abbeys to palaces, noble women endured a paradox. To be noble meant to be valuable, but that value condemned them to captivity, ransom, sacrifice. And the chronicles, obsessed with kings and warriors, left only fragments. Women whose bloodlines shaped kingdoms became invisible currencies, their names lost, their fates footnotes. But every so often, archaeology, DNA, or saga fragments lift the veil. A glimpse into the lives erased, a whisper of resistance, a shadow of truth, and some whispers come from acts of defiance so shocking they couldn't be erased. At monasteries, abbesses chose fire over violation. In Iceland, Melkorka chose silence. Across Europe, noble women found slivers of resistance, even when resistance meant death. And yet, their stories rarely made it into sagas. Viking glory silenced them. But archaeology keeps finding bones, teeth, traces, silent testimonies, screaming louder than ink. History forgets the captives, but their blood flows on. In Iceland, in Ireland, even today, their descendants walk, unaware they carry the DNA of stolen queens. And the legacy wasn't only biological, it was psychological, a shadow written into cultures. Generations later, sagas whispered pride in Viking ancestry. But hidden beneath, trauma lived on, disguised in silence, in myths, in scars unspoken by women forced into foreign halls. So what's worse, to vanish nameless, or to endure remembered only as property? Noble women faced both. Their lives became riddles. History still struggles to answer. And yet, we're only halfway through. The stories so far reveal captivity. But what came next twisted captivity into spectacle, ritual, and legacy. And it's darker still, because noble women weren't just stolen. They were transformed into symbols of power. Captivity wasn't always silent chains. For some noble women, it became theatre, paraded as trophies at feasts, forced to serve wine in the same halls their fathers once ruled. Every act reminded them of lost status. Once queens, now cupbearers. Their beauty flaunted as spoils, their silence demanded. Every laugh at their expense was another chain tightened. But the humiliation wasn't always enough. Some women became pawns in politics. Forced marriages sealed alliances between conquerors and conquered. A union written not in love but in fear, betrayal, and cold survival. The chronicles praised such unions as peace, but for the women it was exile within their own skin. A prison without walls but no escape, and worse fates awaited those marked for ritual. In Norse ritual, captives could be sacrificed. To serve a dead master in the afterlife was considered honor. For noble women, it was obliteration dressed as ceremony. The Oseberg ship burial revealed such shadows. A younger foreign noblewoman, her life shifted by conquest, was likely sacrificed. Her final breath silenced beneath carved oak. But ritual wasn't the only prison. Others lived as frilla, concubines. Neither wives nor slaves, they lingered in limbo, their worth measured only by sons they bore, their silence mistaken for obedience. Some, like Melkorka of Iceland, chose silence. Refusing to speak for years, she turned muteness into armor, a rebellion invisible but unbroken. But silence was fragile. Secrets couldn't stay hidden. Her son overheard Gaelic whispered by the river. In that moment truth returned. She was no thrall but a princess in exile, a queen in chains. Revelation changed her standing, but not her fate. Even discovered royalty remained trapped. The cage was gilded, but still a cage, and worse, cages were carved not in wood or iron, but in memory. Women carried trauma across generations. Forced unions produced heirs who inherited both power and silence. Their bloodlines founded dynasties, built on bones their mothers never chose. Their suffering wasn't forgotten, it was buried, folded into sagas disguised as myth, drowned in songs of conquest. But the truth lingers between lines, and sometimes defiance burned brighter than silence. At Coldingham, Abbess Ebba and her nuns chose mutilation over violation. Their faces scarred, their voices steady. They defied conquest even as fire consumed them. The Vikings cheated of their prize, burned the abbey alive. The sisters chose their death. Their silence roared louder than screams. Not every woman bowed. Some turned their final moments into legend. Such defiance terrified invaders. A woman refusing her role shattered their power. Even fire couldn't erase the symbol, souls unbroken in a world designed to break them. But most captives couldn't choose flames. For them, defiance meant surviving another day, an act of rebellion when survival itself was stolen. and survival meant carrying scars that outlived empires. Generations later, archaeologists dig bones marked by trauma. Teeth, skulls, DNA all whisper the same truth. Conquest didn't just build kingdoms. It broke women, then buried them in silence. Yet every bone tells more than chronicles. The sagas glorified men. The earth remembers women. And the earth doesn't lie because the truth still sleeps beneath us, waiting to be unearthed. The soil of Dublin, the ice of Iceland, the graves of Norway. Each excavation adds another voice, another fragment of forgotten queens. Each find sharpens the outline of a hidden history. A shadow world of women who were more than victims. They were the silent architects of nations, and their silence still echoes today. Even now, descendants carry traces in bloodlines, traditions, and legends. Noble women's fates weren't erased. They linger in the DNA of nations. What does it mean to live but unseen? To build dynasties but remain voiceless? These are the questions their bones whisper in silence, and the answer lies in the darkest part of Conquest. Because Conquest wasn't just about land or silver. It was about erasing memory, taking women whose names could have shaped chronicles and burying them as shadows. And yet, shadows endure. Their stories survive in whispers, in graves, in scars. Pieces of queens who refused to vanish, even when history tried to erase them. But what happens when silence itself becomes a weapon? For many noble women, survival meant playing roles scripted by their captors. Smiles forced at feasts. Words measured. Every gesture watched. Their lives became theatre in cages gilded with fear. But behind masks, cracks always formed. Some women used subtle rebellion. A hidden word, a secret symbol sewn into clothes, a whispered lullaby in their native tongue. Tiny flames of resistance in halls of silence. But every act carried risk. If discovered, punishment was merciless, public shaming, beatings, or worse. Survival demanded silence, but silence devoured the self, and silence has its own cost. Chroniclers rarely mention their names, but bones whisper truths sagas ignored. Women carried malnutrition, broken bones, and childbirth trauma, the invisible scars of conquest, buried beneath grandeur. Their pain became inheritance. Sons born of conquest carried two bloodlines, conqueror and conquered. Yet only one was celebrated in sagas, while the other lived in shadow. But shadows have long memories. Some noble women became symbols, living hostages used to enforce loyalty. Their bodies were borders, their wombs transformed into battlegrounds where bloodlines decided alliances. Every child they bore was both weapon and curse. Sons legitimized conquest. Daughters risked repeating their mother's fate. Their very blood ensured the cycle continued, and sometimes survival itself was betrayal. For some, choosing survival meant accepting roles as queens under new masters. Their titles preserved, their freedoms stolen. Their crowns became masks heavier than chains. In sagas, these women appear as silent wives, unnamed companions, shadowed figures. But silence was not consent. It was survival etched in every breath they dared take. But what the sagas silenced, archaeology now speaks. Excavations in Iceland show matrilineal DNA from Ireland and Scotland, proof that conquest reshaped bloodlines. Behind every Viking settler stood a stolen woman's shadow. Even in death, control lingered. Sacrificed women buried with queens, their bodies offerings, their silence eternal. Graves became prisons carved in soil. But bones revealed truths sagas dared not tell. At Oseberg, one noble woman's foreign DNA told a story sagas ignored. She was no servant, but a stolen noble, sacrificed to serve her mistress even in death. Even archaeology admits uncertainty. Were these women willing or coerced? The soil cannot answer, but silence itself testifies to a violence words refused to record. And silence too can be weaponized. Captors wrote sagas, conquered women left none. Their silence preserved conquerors' glory while burying their own screams. History itself became complicit in their erasure. Their erasure wasn't absence, it was design. a silence woven so tightly it disguised slavery as legend, violence as honor, conquest as destiny. But every silence leaves cracks. Through those cracks fragments leak, a whisper in a saga,
a bone in a grave, a name in a ledger.
Each piece restoring a stolen story. Still, countless remain nameless, their stories erased so thoroughly only soil remembers. Every uncovered bone is a defiance against centuries of silence, and the soil still holds secrets. Secrets not of kings, but queens without thrones, princesses buried in shallow graves, women turned into shadows by conquest, now rising through archaeology. But what if silence was survival's last shield? A strategy, not weakness? Perhaps these women wielded silence as weapon, resisting conquest in the only way left. And silence can echo louder than screams. Even in shadows, they endured. Every son-born, every dynasty raised carried fragments of their survival. Their silence forged nations. Without them, conquest collapses. Behind every Viking king was a noble woman conquered, silenced, and erased, yet essential to power. And history without them is a lie. The sagas sang of men, the soil whispers of women. To ignore those whispers is to blind ourselves to half of history. So ask yourself, how much of history is missing? How many queens erased? How many daughters buried nameless? Silence is the greatest conquest, but silence cannot last forever. And every story we recover cracks the silence. Every name restored is a rebellion against forgetting. These women are no longer shadows, they are history. Every empire built on silence eventually breaks. Viking power too would crumble, not from within, but through time, rebellion, and justice. History could no longer deny. But what of the women left behind? Some noble women vanished nameless, their bones lost. Others endured through children who reshaped dynasties. Their legacy, hidden in bloodlines, whispered in family names, long after sagas forgot them. When Viking kingdoms fell, their queens were remembered. But captive noblewomen remained shadows, vital to conquest, erased in memory. History crowned kings, but women bore the cost. And still, silence lingered. Even in erasure, silence shaped history. Every erased queen left scars on nations, unseen threads binding conqueror and conquered alike in blood and memory. Archaeology reopens grave sagas silenced. Each bone, each artifact, challenges Viking legends. The truth isn't in songs of glory, it's in whispers of those forgotten, and those whispers grow louder. DNA speaks where sagas lied. Icelandic women's ancestry shows conquest wasn't only battles, it was blood, rewritten in silence, generation by generation. Their resilience wasn't written in sagas. It was carried in lullabies, taught in secret tongues, in stories whispered to children who never forgot. Even silence carries songs. Some women resisted with fire, some with silence.
Others with lineage.
Each strategy carved defiance into history, even if chroniclers chose blindness. And yet, when we read sagas, their absence screams louder than words. Erasure itself is testimony, a crime too vast to ignore. The silence itself is evidence. Modern historians dig beyond legend. They ask the forbidden question, not just what Vikings won, but what noble women lost, and what their stolen futures cost the world. For every Viking hero, there is a silenced queen. For every conquest, a woman broken or bound. Two halves of one story, only now reunited. But reunions come with reckoning. Their reckoning isn't vengeance, it's remembrance. To remember is to resist. To speak their names is to shatter the silence they were forced to carry. Every story we tell revives them. Every listener who learns becomes accomplice in remembrance, guardian against forgetting, and forgetting is the true death. History books praise conquests, but the soil praises survival. These women endured, shaping bloodlines that outlived kings and conquerors. Their survival is victory. The true legacy of conquest isn't crowns or gold. It's lives silenced, women erased, stories lost. To restore them is to reclaim truth itself. And truth cannot remain buried. Archaeology digs bones, memory digs silence. Together they weave voices back into history, refusing to let erasure win. Through these fragments, noble women rise again, not as victims but as voices refusing silence, haunting every saga that tried to bury them, and they whisper still. Their whispers are questions. What is conquest without its cost? What is history without its shadows? Who tells the story when half the voices are gone? We cannot answer fully, but we can listen. Each recovered fragment is rebellion, each name remembered of victory, and remembering is resistance. Resistance takes many forms: fire, silence, survival. Today, it takes memory. We speak for the nameless because silence serves only the conquerors. Their fate was unspoken then. But now we speak. We pull them from silence, one story at a time, until history can no longer deny them. And with every story told, silence weakens. So next time sagas sing of Viking heroes, remember the women. They were the invisible currency of conquest, the forgotten queens of empire. Their lives remind us, conquest is not just victory, it's silence imposed on others. But silence cracks and truth always seeps through, and the truth is already rising. We remember them not as footnotes, but as voices stolen and restored. Their silence ends here, their story echoes now, and through us they live again.